Welcome everybody, welcome back to our Monday session, and also welcome if this is the first time you come along. I'm Simon Walker, I'm Director of Training at Maxon. We've also got the wonderful Nick Harauz on the line.
Hi everybody, great to be here.
Great to have you back, Nick. On the line, that's probably an anachronistic saying. It's probably in the last century, in the days of analog. On the digital, I should say. Hi from Rotterdam. Hi, Rob. Hi, Mads. And we're just a couple of housekeeping things before we start. Yes, we're recording this session, and you automatically get a link to it via email after the session ends. And if you want to watch any of the previous sessions, on my screen here, we've got the blog post on the Red Giant website, which details what we're doing from week to week. And you just can go to redgiant.com and click on the blog button. But here we go. This is what we're doing today, animating particles with audio. And if you missed the last couple of weeks, the May the 4th and May the 11th, then feel free to click on the link. Actually, the name of the link, that will take you through to the recording, so you can watch the recording for those. And we've begun to add the download files that we talk about to this section here. So you can then just download and play around with some of the files we were talking about. And we'll do the same today. We've got some project files for you that we're going to share too. Great, and but it looks and sounds good. Thanks, Kent. Kent's a regular. He anticipates what I'm going to say next. This is good. Thank you, Kent. Making sure the technology is working well. That's great. And the idea today is that actually we're going to do more than just talk about animating particles with audio. We're going to talk about how to animate all sorts of parameters in After Effects using a variety of tools. And we'll center on sound keys inside Trapcode Suite. In fact, I've got a handy little visual for you. If you go to the Trapcode page and scroll down a bit, here we go. Sound keys has been around for quite a while now, but it's super useful in terms of organizing and triggering animations from different sound elements. So we'll talk about that. And also there is capability inside Trapcode Form up here to do audio react. So to react from audio, that you can drive your own particles. And there's different pros and cons between those. So we'll look at those. And also there's a couple of things inside Mia that might be useful. I set up a waveform or a pseudo waveform inside Mia. So that's something else we can look at shortly. Great. Okay. I think that's all the housekeeping. I think that's a record. We're on the hour before right when we start. So that's good because we usually overrun. So hi, Joey. Hi from Orlando. I happen to be in rainy Oregon at the moment. And Nick, you're in Toronto, aren't you?
Yes, I'm in Toronto, and it is equally rainy and thunderstormy here. So I feel right at home with you. Only difference is it's the Canadian holiday weekend, so it's actually Victoria Day. So it's a long weekend, and I think your long weekend, like the U.S. long holiday, is next weekend, right? Next week.
That's right. Yes. Oh well. Yeah. Congrats. Thank you for spending your holiday with us, Nick.
No problem. It's something. I'm actually I have a mirage of presentations today, and yeah, no, I'm excited to be here, especially and talk about audio too.
Fantastic, excellent. Jay from Newcastle says that or Newcastle, I should say, sorry, it's not that much better weather-wise. So welcome to May. And greetings from Boston from Michael. Excellent. Cool. So let's jump into stuff. I'm going to hand over to you, Nick. I'm going to make you a presenter. Here we are. And let's over to you. And I believe you're just going to kick off with some stuff about sound keys. Is that right?
Yes. I'm going to kick off
with form.
I'm going to kick off with some stuff about sound keys, but I also just wanted to let everyone know what's in After Effects first of all, and why you'd want to go to sound keys or form in the first place, and then just talk about audio in general because I think it's super important and usually often overlooked. I have a very simple.
Absolutely. I think that's the other thing I meant to say at the beginning. The whole point of these sessions is that we want to give you building blocks to be able to craft animations, and also just give you ideas about what's possible. So I think you're absolutely right, Nick. It's not all just centered on some of the Red Giant tools. There are actually tools inside After Effects that you can combine with that.
Yes, totally. And first of all, I think I wanted to kind of show a limitation with After Effects. So for the longest time, you can always, in After Effects, with your audio selected, press LL, and that will reveal the waveform of an audio source. And if you hold down the Command key or the Control key, you might hear from my system that you can scrub it. And you can take this information and from the animation menu, head to your lovely keyframe assistant and convert this audio to keyframes.
I think we're slightly behind you, actually,
Oh,
Nick. I think there's a bit of a delay on your session. So what we'll
hold
do
on.
is we've had this problem before occasionally. What has worked in the past is if I make me presenter and then chuck back over to you.
Okay.
And okay, bear with us. Usually
No
it's pretty
problem.
good. That's one of the reasons why I took my webcam off, so that we don't hog the bandwidth. But let's
Okay.
bring you back again, make presenter, because you're a good 10 seconds behind your audio.
God, it's always great to talk from the future, but let's not. If we can
Well, you
avoid
are.
it, I'm all for it.
For me, you're 3 hours in the future.
I am 3 hours in the future. And hold on. Can you see my
Right. I
panel?
can
It's
see your
still
screen
it's
now. We can see your sunburst background in After Effects.
okay. So I'm just checking the interactivity. So I'm going to repeat those steps. So because I'm not sure what you guys saw, so I'm going to press LL, and that reveals the audio waveform on a layer. And After Effects, in terms of converting data, is the following. You head to the animation menu, and under Keyframe Assistant, it will convert your audio to keyframes. The catch is the following. All your audio data is together. There is no separation of frequencies. It's literally just the levels of the audio converted to, as you can see, as I scrub through my timeline, I see that I have a bunch of sliders for the left channel, the right channel, both channels. But really, with audio in particular, more than likely, you're going to want to hone in on a particular frequency. That could be the bass, that could be a higher frequency, that could be someone's voice. And this is where the built-in conversion tool in After Effects kind of falls short. This is a
Nick,
perfect.
we've still got a delay on here. We're about 10 seconds behind you. So we could, I think, if we can't get rid of it just by switching between us, maybe
Can
we
people
could
see?
bear this in mind.
Because I can see my playhead moving right now.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the delay across the network. Randy
Okay.
has mentioned this as well, so we'll have to bear that in mind when you do stuff.
Okay, got it. I will be. What I'm going to do is switch over slowly to a keynote for a second here, and just let me know when you can visually see this.
Okay. Oh goodness, this is a good start, isn't it? We've
Can you
had pretty
guys?
good interactivity. Okay, just there with the keynote. So
Okay,
you're about
great.
10,
Yeah.
maybe 12 seconds or so behind.
So I'm about 10 seconds behind, which is really good information. But this is still, regardless of that delay and us dealing with uh, the lovely speed of our internet connections, I should mention to you, usually whenever I teach about principles of animation, I always lead to these theories from Walt Disney and classic animators. When they talk about animation in general or classic animation, these are the 12 principles that they say you should always apply, and all of them go back into motion graphics. However, if I were to add a principle, it would be audio, it would be sound. I think sound is extremely important. It depending on the rule of who you talk to, Simon, it's going to be even more important than video or equally as important. But regardless, in a lot of video as well as motion graphic pieces, sometimes audio falls through the cracks. And form, along with sound keys, offer this amazing gateway as it comes to working with audio. And some things I just like to wrap up of what's involved there. So I'm just going to show all of my points here at once and let it catch up. Da, 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 da. Here we go. So with those points, audio is just as important as video. Audio animations and keyframes in After Effects, as we saw, are limited. Trapcode sound keys and form are the gateways to audio. And several properties, specifically with form, I have to mention when you start to use your audio reaction, need to be activated. Some will animate automatically. And then as a final note, I just want to mention that After Effects actually does have tools which aren't great for conversion, but are great for visualization. And I have a couple examples to show in a little bit on that. On a secondary note, I just had a few other points, and I'm going to then toss it over to you to Simon, see if we could pick up a little bit more on the screen there. But we can use anything with sound keys. We're going to be showing primarily particular and form-based examples, but sound keys can attach to, if you have a Red Giant subscription, anything within that subscription, and that's super exciting, not to mention any After Effects property. You can build complex reactions with sound keys and particle simulations. And the one thing I recommend, and I'll repeat this and show an example of this later, is to study something called the rays. Everything in After Effects has a value. That value might be one item. So like, to give you an example, opacity has an array of 1. There's only a value that goes from 0 to 100. Rotation in a 2D world has an array of 1 as well. In 3D, it has an array of 3. This array system, or knowing how you can work and tweak it, will help you connect animations with sound keys. And lastly, sound key is all about translation. It's about taking a set of values which identify sound and figuring out how you can use those values with whatever parameter that you want to attach it with. So this is a great point for me to hand this back over to you, Simon. Maybe we'll get a little bit of better speed there.
Got it. Okay. What I will do then is I will jump into sound keys here and show you that example since we're starting off with that one.
And just a thought here. I know that should I maybe quickly just try to log out and in? That might help with some of the lag, I'm thinking.
Let's do that. Yes, please. Yes, please.
Awesome. So I'm going to do that. I'll see everyone back in a short second. Okay.
Cool. We're fixing it live. Thank you. Then what Nick was referring to inside After Effects was the ability inside Keyframe Assistant to convert audio to keyframes, which has been around there for a while. It was, I believe, in a previous version, it was under the Create menu. They moved these menus around in CC 2019, I think. But anyway, so it's now inside Keyframe Assistant. And if you convert audio to keyframes, what it does is it takes the amplitude of that particular setting and then creates a bunch of keyframes according to those particular amplitudes. And there's similar in concept, which we'll look at with sound keys in a second, where you can create keyframes. But the problem here is that these amplitude keyframes are limited to the amount of amplitude on the actual sound file itself. Just here, we've got 20 units, or a little over maybe 20 or 30 units. Here we go, 27.17 on that keyframe. And when you've got the keyframes, you can select multiple ones and you can drag a range of them up and down by selecting them, but it's not as configurable. And one of the key techniques is then to grab those keyframes and then do a pick whip and grab them onto a property of another element. So in this, for example, this would be an example of how I've grabbed those keyframes and added them to the size setting for form. And in this case, when we just look at that size, then that size is 24, which matches the unit more or less. It rounds it up to an integer inside the panel here. But that's the problem when you're messing around with these keyframes inside After Effects. And the difference with sound keys is that you can actually target a range of keyframes. So let's open this one up here. And in this case, what I'm going to do is go into sound keys, Trapcode sound keys. By the way, how is our synchronization? I'm going to click on sound keys now, and then that's going to bring up the sound keys interface. And then I'll click on the solo button now, and we've got the sound keys interface looking at the audio layer. 2-second delay. Okay, thanks, William. That's much better than 10 or 15 seconds. Great. If I just point at this drum loop and scrub over the settings, then the nice thing about sound keys, it gives you this video or this visual display of what the frequencies are like. No lag. Thanks, Randy, and thanks, Jay. That's brilliant. And the whole point about sound keys is that you can click on this range map. Here it is, the range map, and select a certain frequency. And I'm going to do this quickly because we do have links to tutorials which go through this and exactly what we're showing in a much slower fashion, but we've got so much to get through in this hour. I wanted to give you the top takeaways from this and things that I found useful. But in essence, what you do is that you drag this range and you isolate a waveform. By the way, here's a gotcha. If you haven't got sound keys selected inside the Effects Controls tab, you can't see the range slider. So that's just something that can catch you out. And when you click on it, you see these two little crosshairs, and then it brings it back. And here's the essential concept. If you isolate a waveform, in this case, that's the snare. I happen to know it's the snare because on this drum loop, double L to reveal the, there we are. That's the snare on this easy drum loop. And I happen to know, or rather, sorry, that's the, where is the snare? There it is. So if I isolate that frequency, notice that I have filled up my export bar by 50%. And if I then create apply, here we go, apply, then I can create a range of keyframes like so, which are around that 50 units point. So you can control how your keyframes are going to be generated. If I then thought, well, I want this to be much higher, I want to fill to 100%, because in this example, I want to apply all those keyframes onto the opacity of another layer. There's a quick little tip. You just reduce this down to a smaller section, which completely fills the bar. Notice the idea about this, by the way, is that if I'm on a different frame, I'm not getting any bleed from other channels. So I'm only actually getting the exact amount of that snare hit when I go on top of it, because I'm actually removing getting any activity from below it. That's really the advantage of doing this in the grid like so. And when we've got these keyframes, we can go on to something like the opacity section of, let's just open up the keyframes here. I can drag the opacity pick whip from this other layer onto those keyframes. Then I've then applied it to them. So that means that in this case, let's just isolate here and just click on the keyframes. When I'm, I've got it the other way around, sorry. It's the other way around, isn't it? It's that way around. That's better. Okay. Shows what I'm trying to do two things at once. Here is the finished version of here. Here we go. This is what I've done correctly onto here. I've mapped it onto the sound key, sound element, and show you what I've done onto this one. Here we go. So on this example, I've now got the pick whipped those keyframes onto the opacity. Here we are, and this is how they should be behaving. Here we go. So we've now got 100 units because we designated it from the sound keys control. Now, what if we wanted to have less than 100 units, but not want to redraw the actual range finder here? There's a number of different settings inside sound keys that you can work with. And by the way, whilst we're looking at it, at the moment, we've got an instant fall off for these sound keys. And so they're instantly dropping off to 0, but we could do a linear. Let's just click linear and apply, and then it stretches out those elements So I'm actually reducing the opacity of this background layer until 0 in a linear fashion, or we can actually hit exponential and hit apply to recalculate the keyframes. Notice that we're not having to do any of that linking again. We can recalculate them and then it fades off in an easier fashion. And another quick tip here, if we then wanted to, rather than have it 100 to 0, we wanted to fade the opacity out of this other layer up to about 50%, then you can set your output minimum max to 50%. This is something that I've used a whole bunch of times, set minimum to around 50%. And if we hit apply, then those keyframe values then actually only output at 50%, because now we've got, even when they go down to the base of those original keyframes, we're still seeing 50% of the opacity for that output. So there's a couple of quick ways of working with this. Now, the interesting thing is that this is fine for an example where you just want to have it controlling the background. If we switch off sound keys, you can control elements for another layer. But the nice thing about sound keys, of course, is that it has an interface. So it has a visual element to it. And what's nice about this is that you can then use that visual element to drive animations inside your scene. And in one of the tutorials on the Red Giant site, which I'll point out the link to shortly, well, let's show you here, if we can control the visual element of sound keys, let's turn off here we are, turn this one here and turn it from stencil alpha to normal. So what I've got here, I've got sound keys with a couple of effects on. Let's turn them all off and let's turn on sound keys. And inside sound keys, you have the ability to change the spectrum. So you can change the spectrum color map for all sorts of different styles of color, and also have your own custom ones too. And then you can also change the smoothness of the curve and change its scale, and change the smoothness to see how big or small you want to move it, or even quantize it, or even change the segment values so it fill with a segment and so on. So you can then start to make it look like these previous 1980s LCD displays, which is quite fun. And in one of the tutorials, Harry Frank talks about taking this sort of setup and then actually playing around with it, maybe adding a polar coordinates so it's then wrapped around the center of the frame. And then if you use transform, here's a little tip, by the way, if you want to make this bigger, transform is a good one to add before sound keys, because then you get a pretty decent edge to it. And here's an idea: if I put transform after sound keys, then you see it's slightly softer because the transform is happening after the procedural sound key elements have been generated. But if we put this on the top like so, then you can go down to something like stencil alpha, and then you can cause a background to be visible on and off, if you like. Here's the alpha channel for this. So we're using the generation of that sound key element to actually be a visual represent or a visual controller, so that we're changing the background or the opacity of another layer. So
I love this trick.
It's a nice trick, but I wanted to show you a better version of it. So let's just quickly jump over to, where is it? Here we are. There's a wonderful member on the Red Giant team, Hashi, who you also might know from Action Movie Kid on YouTube, and he does things properly. So he's using this same concept, and I'll just scrub through this slowly. Here we are, where we are using exactly that idea, where we're building up the color maps, but actually he's then taken this one step further, because in this example, he's got, in fact, he's taken the 3D scan of this scene and actually put some placeholder solids and then added sound keys to those solids. So as you scrub through, then you've got a really nice quantize effect that we just looked at onto the buildings, but without actually having to build this from scratch, because we're using sound keys as the visual generator. And there's a nice little setup here, because if we just jump back into the original one, here we are. So this is one of the pre-comps where he's got multiple of these setups. Let's just show you. We got I think it's a track solid down here in the background. So he's using these track solids and instances of sound keys over the top of those. And if I just go back into the main comp, he's also using a couple of track mats, because if we turn off all the effects, here's the one without any effects. Here is the track mat where he's comping in a different sky as well, and so he's using the track mat from an alpha to be able to then separate the sky, and then on top of that we've got that nice ability to then have those quantize visual feedback elements, I suppose, actually on the buildings themselves. So it's kind of a nice progression from something which is quite simple to set up on a keyframe to an animation which makes more sense and is a more delivered or more considered example, like with these buildings. Great. I'm going to risk handing over to you now, Nick, and we've backed close to no delay.
Excellent, amazing. So let's just see how this this goes. I'm excited to hopefully be back in real time.
Okay, let's just make you a presenter again, Nick. Okay, here we go. Great. So you have control again.
I am just waiting for the invite. It just came through. Did my screen pop up right away?
Yep, got your screen.
Awesome. And I just moved my playhead. Did everyone see that?
Yes, I can see you moving playhead.
I love it. Okay.
Fantastic. That solved it.
So,
Logging in and out. Thank you for doing that, Nick.
No problem. It's amazing how you can get technology to work for you. I wanted to show an example of Trapcode form, and also a way of helping you visualize how Trapcode form works. So let me just play this back, but there are two sets of particles at play here. There is one in the foreground that's a lot less, and if I play it back, those particles, which are more dense, are being reacted in terms of their scale to the music that's inside my composition. So I wanted to go into form here and just show you the section that is specifically dedicated for audio reaction. You can see it here on the left-hand side. And when you hop inside, the one thing that you want to do besides choose an audio layer to react to is choose a specific frequency. If you're just new with audio and you're not sure which frequency you would like to look at, I have a recommendation for you. So let me show you the recommendation.
So Nick,
inside my existing comp.
Can you back up a second here? Just so we can look at that again. Inside form, we have a section called Audio React. Now, this doesn't require keyframes, does it? This is looking at the actual audio live of the audio that you're mapping to inside your comp stack.
Correct. So in this exact example, it's looking at the audio inside my project, the music. It's chosen a specific frequency, and I'm mapping a specific parameter, in this instance, the particle size, to react based on a specific strength value. And then over time, that strength value comes into play to make these particles react to that specific frequency. Now, in adding to it, the big question is, which I think where sound keys is awesome, is you can kind of see the frequencies, but I wanted to mention that there's also a built-in tool in After Effects that you can use as well. So I'm going to add a solid to the project. I'm just going to call it Audio Spec, because under the Effects menu, specifically under the Generate section, I'm going to add this audio spectrum. And just so that you guys see this, I'm going to head over to my comps and turn off my proxy here. Okay, so by default, the audio spectrum doesn't look like much. What you need to do is connect it to a specific audio layer. So what I'm doing is just referencing my audio. And what I want to tell you is right now the starting frequency of my audio is 20. The end frequency is 2000. And in between 20 and 2000, there are currently 64 frequency bands. To see this even better, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, let me start with a low frequency of 0 and an end frequency of 100, 1,000. In between 1 and 1,000, I want approximately 20 bands. In fact, let's make this 0. And what you can see right now is the fact that this goes 0, 50, 100, 150, 200. It allows you to see the frequencies, and we could do even more, which is to increase their height.
Nick, what's a good way of investigating frequencies? Because sometimes when you're dialing in these sliders, it's quite esoteric, and you're dialing in unless you know that like the frequency of a heartbeat is around about 50 hertz, and I think a snare drum is 5,000 and a hi-hat is 7,000, and the human range is a bit lower, is in between something like 4 and 7, isn't it? But,
Yeah, and it depends.
Sorry,
Sorry for cutting you off, Simon. Yeah, and it changes like based on in some cases male and female the frequency, but just to have a visual guide, so you can look at your music and kind of see where frequencies lie by doing a little bit of math with this audio spectrum. I found it super helpful to me to then visualize, okay, well, what frequency might be advantageous to select inside of Trapcode form.
that's a nice trick.
Yeah, so a great trick just to kind of use, and wanted to break down this project a little bit. One thing that I just love about Trapcode Form as well as Trapcode Particular is your fact of being able to map image sequences. And right now I have an image sequence of musical instruments. So they're music symbols, that's the actual composition. And I used, here you can see all of them, looking pretty great. They're super small in size just because I want them to be referenced by a particle system. I created a composition that is 69 by 69, which is really small and great for particles because they're going to be referenced multiple times by either particular or Trapcode form. And then with that mapping, this image sequence that was prepared, you can see that each layer in particular is laid out sequentially. If I head over into form, I'll show that if we take a look at the form react sequence, which has all of this, and we look at the based form, it's set to an OBJ, which is actually a model that I took out of Cinema 4D, which is the amplifier here. So my particles are mapped to the amplifier, and the particles themselves are set to Sprite colorize, which means I want to color my image sequence. Just to show this, if I head down into a specific section called texture, you'll see it's referencing that image sequence, in particular, the music symbols, set to random still frame. This then combined with an audio reaction, in particular this particle size, creates a lovely little animation in terms of having that size react over time. So I wanted to mention that audio spectrum I thought is amazing to use. And also wanted to show when it comes to form, Simon, I shared with you this a few days ago, a music video, which I thought was a super great use of Trapcode form in particular. It was done a few years ago, but I still think it looks amazing and deals with multiple particle systems. And if you watch this video on YouTube, so it's by M83, We Own the Night.
I've just added the link.
It's a lot of slow motion particle systems with really simple audio reactions that only work in seldom during certain animations, but light paths, motion paths, not to mention strings, a fantastic use of particles and how it comes together with music. So I would definitely recommend to check that out. And Simon, something I didn't share with you, but had to mention, is it got me to think about my own music video, a music video that I edited several years ago. And there was something that I just wanted to share that's kind of outside of the particle system. So this music video was by a Canadian group called The Reason. The music video is called Come and Go. It was shot with it was shot with one camera, but there were like 8 or 9 different takes that happened, and I was at the time responsible for cutting this in Final Cut Pro 4 and working with the cinematographer Mika Dahan at the time. When he took a look at the rough cut of the music video, one of the things that he wanted to do to add more energy to specific scenes was to add a camera shake. Now, this camera shake itself, while outside of particle systems, was done manually. So, Simon, I just went in to the scale and the position parameters, right? And started to play around with those shake and position values to add some more life to the music video. Since that time of editing the music video, one thing in particular that I had to mention, and although it's outside of the particle system, would be your ability to take specific distortion effects and map them to Trapcode sound keys. So in the music video light. And while not particles, I used sound keys in this example here, and specifically mapped it to Universe's camera shake, which was used in the Terminator film, Simon, if I'm correctly, the newest Terminator film.
That's
and then
correct.
Universe chromatic aberration. There's 2 references of sound keys for each of the individual effects because they have different parameters or different strengths. But the end result is then through your music, which I'll reveal by pressing LL, this time distortion to a particular frequency. So you can kind of see a little bit of the warping of the frames as well as the subtle camera shake that takes place. But I can utilize sound keys like Simon was showing a little bit earlier, where you just increase or customize a range of values. And then based on that range and the range of values on the range selector, you can get some pretty interesting animations.
Nice. I mean, those sorts of things are useful for customizing it, because I think that's the key. If you've got something which then can be linked into the original, especially in a music video like this, then those are going to be timed much more accurately than if you were doing it, let's say, on a keyframe basis manually.
Yes. So yeah, I wanted to show those 2 kind of examples of music. I have a few more, but let me hand this back over to you for a little bit, Simon, because I know you have some awesome, interesting stuff to show as well.
Yes, I've got a couple of things about what we've got, how you can do it, but why you would do it is quite an interesting thing, and how you might set those up. By the way, I added a couple of links into the notes, and I added a link for that music video you were talking about, but also there's a tutorial that Harry Frank has made on the Regent site, which takes into consideration very similar effects to the music video we're talking about. And we'll add this link into the email as well at the end. But that's something worthwhile having a quick look at. And if we just jump into After Effects again, what I wanted to show was, let's say you've got something like this. Here we go. So this is a very simple setup. I've got an instance of form. On my base form, I've got just this easy grid of particles, and I've got a custom particle, one from the library, this heart, or this heart sprite. And the idea here is that every time there's a heartbeat, every 2 heartbeats, then we get an animation triggered on that. And I want to just show this setup because I wanted to explain something. If we just jump into the controls for form under Audio React, I've just pointed it towards the layer, and we're using particle size, strength 30%, so that's 30% over the current particle size. You can make it bigger if you need to, and so on. And also I've limited the width and the threshold, so it's just picking up that one frequency, so that the frequency of the heartbeat specifically, and it's not reacting otherwise. So there's a couple of things here. One is you don't have to have the audio audible. You don't have to hear it. If you switch off the audio, you still get the animation. So you could use an audio element to drive an animation on the screen, which wasn't part of the final delivery. That's something useful to remember. Secondly, by the way, if you switch off the visual, then you can't see the waveform when you're scrubbing. But anyway, so it's useful to have it there as an indicator. But the other thing is, the whole point of doing the audio react inside form is that you aren't relating to keyframes, and you can do very simple things like just dragging the whole audio down the timeline, and it won't react until it actually hears or registers those frequencies. So this is great for just retiming stuff at the last minute, or just swapping out a completely different audio rhythm. So if you wanted to animate something, even if it was just as simple as just tapping on the desk and recording the sound of that tapping, then if you do a different rhythm, then you will see a different response on the screen. A couple of different things I wanted to show in here. You'll notice that as I'm dragging slowly, these particles are rippling across the screen. This is something that Nick was showing earlier on with the setup, where if you jump into the delay direction, you can control whether you want them, say, in outwards, or we can go, let's go left to right on the x-axis. And I've just got a very, very small delay here, 0.1 of a second. And that's then animating these from the left to the right to give a little kind of small sophistication to an animation. And an extension of this is, what if you just need to animate one thing quickly and then repeat it? Let's just show you this. Heartbeat single is the layer. And I've got a very simple setup. I've got one particle in X, Y, and the Z axes. And that particle is that sprite element, that heart sprite from the library of sprites you automatically get with form. And in this case, I'm using those same settings. Here we go, the audio react, to just trigger the size of this heartbeat, strength over X. But the thing I want to point out here is that because waveforms have a much more analog nature, although they're digital files, of course, the structure of their amplitude can seem much more analog than something that if you were animating something digital. So in this case, as I'm scrubbing from frame to frame, then each of the accelerations for the strength over the axis is described by the original recording. And there's a heartbeat in this example. And so you can get much more organic or non-digital or non-computery animations from using these audio elements, even if they're not going to be part of your scene. Just a sanity check. Nick, is this coming through? Can you see what I'm doing as I'm dragging the mouse?
Hold. Yes, I can. On my end, I can for sure, yes.
Excellent, and Michael can see it too, thank you. Organic is good, thanks Onur. Absolutely. So just small little tricks there that can help you create something quickly, but also something that doesn't look like you've animated a couple of keyframes or spent those hours messing around with the Bezier curves. Great, and with an extension of that, I want to show you something else, which was hearts beating. Thanks, Jay. Another thing that you can do with some of the, where is the heartbeat monitor? Oh, here we are. Some of the presets inside form. And if I just jump into, just open up the form designer. Sometimes you can learn an interesting thing. By the way, if you see this image buffer size, that's a GPU error on my system. And that means it's because I'm driving two screens and I've been doing a whole bunch of other GPU stuff in the background. That's typically fixed when I either restart After Effects or restart my system. But just wanted to not just ignore an error box and click it, just to let you know what's happening if that happens.
I would have probably done that.
Sorry. Absolutely fine. And another little tip, I'm scrolling through some of these presets and I wanted to point something out specifically, but if you've ever found the fact that you've got lots of these presets open and you're having to scrub up and down through the menu, if you just shift click on these disclosure triangles, it closes them all together or opens them all together. That's just like a quick way of reorganizing your stuff, especially if you're going down to the custom section at the bottom. What I wanted to show you is if I click on heads up display, and show you wave scope. And then in this wave scope, in fact, what I'll do is I will apply it to a completely new layer because I had triggered it from that audio. So let's just apply solid, and new solid, hang on, other screen, click OK, and isolate that one, apply an instance of form to that, Trapcode form, and then jump into the effect controls for the designer. Here we go, and then I can go down to my preset. So presets, P for presets, you don't have to click on it. Here we go, this is what I wanted to show you. And it's possible to just accelerate your workflow from using these presets in the classic way, but also learn what form is doing. So in this case, if I hide this background line, just turn off the visibility, and then also turn off this background grid, then we have this one line which is simulating like a heart monitor, a similar type of vector scope, or oscilloscope, I should say, really. In this case, we've got a box string, and it's being animated by the fractal field. We got Y displacing, which is going from left to right. It's a blue color here, but we can just click on the color block and change the color to something else. Green, popular in medical scenarios. But here's the concept. We are using the fractal field, but we are limiting the point. We're pinning the ends of these lines left and right of the screen because of this graph, the fractal strength over graph. These used to be called quick maps a couple of versions ago, but they're called graphs these days inside form. And if we start to adjust these, let's say we'll just bring out this one to the left, we are then not limiting that point. Then so the left-hand side of the frame then is being more distributed in the y-axis. And in fact, if we go back to the no preset at all, then we have the line being drawn all the time. So that concept of using this graph to pin each element at either side of the screen can be used if you wanted to create a custom version of this, which is what I did in this example here. Let's just delete that layer. So in this heart monitor, I've got a blank line, and then halfway through the frame or the comp, let's just open up double L, here we are. So I've got a beep, a single beep, which then is driving the animation, and then it's disappearing. And let's look at form to see how this is being generated. Let's jump into layer maps, sorry, not layer maps, audio react. Look at audio reactor. I'm pointing at that beep layer. I've got map to fractal. This takes into consideration what you get set up in the fractal area. The fractal is Y displace 500, so it's going from left to right. And also, if we just jump back up here again, we have a fractal strength curve. Where can we see the graph? I'm exactly, well done, Randy, you read my script. I'm exactly going to show you the graph. Here we are. So the strength curve is here. And by the way, there's a little cheat going on inside the heart monitor. It's actually, the base form is 6,000 units wide on the x-axis. And if I press EE inside my system, I've just got time times 2,000. So I'm just moving this element left and right down the timeline. If I didn't move it, if I disabled this expression, then you just see the heart rate triggered depending on where you've got this line set up in your comp. So I actually wanted it to animate, so that's why I've got this simple expression moving the X offset across the frame. But the thing I want to point out here is that this strength curve takes precedence over the strength curve in the fractal example down in the bottom of the main fractal section. So if we look at fractal strength over, it's actually off. So we are controlling fractal strength using a very thin curve here, using the Bezier curve rather than the pencil tool inside form. If I just grab that end there and start to move it like so, then you can see visually what's happening on the screen as I'm moving those elements. And the closer I get to the left-hand side of the graph, then the more the heart wave monitor isn't pinned. But just wanted to show you how you can then manipulate something which was a preset. That's how I made this. Just jumped into the preset, turned off a couple of those other elements, and then tweaked this with the audio react section, so you could then create something which is a more custom for using, that's going to tell the particular story that you're working on. And this, by the way, is some of the project files that I'll be sending you via the link at the end of this webinar. And also, if you wanted to look at this right now, I believe I got this set up. Where is it here? Got it on one of these, if I can find it quickly. Okay, tell you what, I'll make do one of these. Just go to YouTube and show you this. On that usual channel that we talk about, my channel for doing these little tips, we've got this thing right at the bottom here, Audio React in Trapcode form. And I will send you the link to this too, because this is a reminder of exactly this technique that's just pointing out to. So in 3 weeks' time, when you're thinking, what was Simon saying again? You can dive in and see 20 seconds worth of this example without having to scrub through to minute 48 of this webinar. So there's a couple of extra resources there. Do I have the download project file? Yes, I do. So in this case too, you can download the project file from this link. So I'll just put this inside the chat box here, audio link in Trapcode 4, and just pop that there for now, but I'll send you this link as well later on. Great. Okay, I do have a couple more things I wanted to show you, but I wanted to hand over to Nick, because you've got some more examples as well, Nick, haven't you?
Yes, I wanted to kind of also share a couple of resources too, which I think might be helpful when we talk about sound and After Effects.
Cool. So, okay, doing a switch over to you again.
Let me switch over my screen. Okay, everyone sees that okay? And awesome. So I'm here in this example of a fluids and setup with sound keys. And before I explain this, there is a plugin that I love specifically for sound effects that I wanted to mention. There's a company out there called Mograph, and they make a plugin / extension called Boombox. What's awesome about this extension in After Effects, once you install it, is it is a full-on sound library of effects. And what you could do is find a category that you like, such as liquid contact. And once you find here we go, let's just see my available ones. Once you find something that you like inside your category, you can download that to your system. And even more so, you can take these sound effects, once downloaded from the categories, and drag them directly into the timeline. So I love the fact of just being able to go here to these collections, and when downloaded properly, I recently updated my After Effects, which is why it's not showing, you have a full-on arsenal of sound effects directly in After Effects. The other thing I'll mention to this about these sound effects is that they've been constantly updating the library. So they'll have an update, and then all of a sudden you have an additional 15 or 20 different effects that you can use. On their Instagram page, Mount Mograph, you can also, if you type in Boombox, see some fantastic examples of how sound is used with both 3D and 2D design. And then you can then take it up a step further by using it with your Trapcode suite. So there we go for a resource. In terms of music, I use something called Artlist, which I can share that link with later, but more for music files and a monthly and very cost-effective solution for having a lot of music. And I wanted to show in this example a few things. So one is I did a little bit of a Trapcode setup here with a fluid simulation. And to explain, let me just play this back first.
You might have to scrub through. I can see it, but it'd be useful if you scrub slowly through that as well, Nick, so we can see it in case there's a lag.
Let me scrub through this and just show that over time, these particles are growing in size, or one set of them, while another set of particles are changing velocity based on the beat of the music. And the setup for that, just to show you, was doing this on two separate versions of sound keys. However you choose to add them is up to you. But usually what I'll do for my own workflow, Simon, is I'll have a range that I've identified with sound keys. In fact, let me just show this on this layer. So I'll have a version of sound keys where I've identified with some sort of range what I would like to use for music. And then I'll go down here and use a custom minimum maximum output. In this case, this version of sound keys was used for the size of those fluid particles. So the range that I've specified happens to be very slow because I didn't want the particles to grow that much at certain periods in time. My workflow is then to take this copy of sound keys. I actually just duplicated the layer. I made a duplicate copy, as you'll see here, of this sound keys velocity. And the only difference is in my custom setup. So once you make a duplicate copy of sound keys, you can customize it again, choose a different minimum max output, and then apply it. This one is mapped from 0 to 150 because I wanted it to affect the velocity of one of my particle systems. And I just love this setup of just being able to switch between the two velocity, like two setups of sound keys, and then apply them these custom setups to different particles. You could also, of course, use division and multiplication to also support your sound key system. I also wanted to mention.
Sorry, Nick, you've got one instance of that graphic, but you're actually driving the keyframes from two instances of sound keys separately.
Correct. Yeah. So it's one Trapcode suite, right? And inside one version of Trapcode, particular. Inside particular, this is actually a preset under the fluid multiple system category. One of the systems is what's lifting off this OBJ object. And I asked one version of sound keys to affect the particle size, while there's yet another version of another parameter that I wanted to affect, and I'll just sort of show this here. So you can see the other parameter is the velocity of one of the particle systems. And over time, draw your attention to the red number. Its velocity every second is changing based on that customized version of sound keys.
Nice, that's quite interesting.
Yeah, and I just found it to be a very fluid workflow because like usually you'll want one source potentially to have it select or affect multiple parameters, but then by figuring out how much you want a parameter to react can be super helpful in particle systems. I wanted to just sort of show one more setup. I have a background here, okay? We'll see here if I show here this Spectra background. And here's my intention, Simon. So my intention is to have this jump in terms of its size to sound keys. So I'll show you what I intend to do. So here's the range that I already have selected, and I'll just press U to reveal those keyframes. And let's just draw your attention right now with this output parameter. Actually, yeah, sure, yeah. You can see that the output parameter number 2 here doesn't rise in scale so much, okay? Like what would happen is if I connected, let me just show you. I'll option click the scale of this background layer, attach it to the output. After Effects now writes a really fascinating piece of code, but here's the problem. Simon, you can see that, right? But the background scale here itself has been minimized, right? To a level that I don't want. So what I would like to do is actually have the audio reacted, but maintain the scale of this object. And this is where it could be handy to add some things to the expression code that has been written. So I'm going to do this very quickly. I'm going to take this temporary variable that's been written, and I'm going to add to it, okay, the X scale value. That's it. And I'm going to show you now that by just doing that, because I added to this temporary value, I now have what I want.
Can you scroll through that slowly for us again, Nick?
Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to play back the music like you guys can see it in real time and all excited, but that is not
Well,
the
we've had
case.
a request. Owners asked if you could possibly share this project file with us so we could see that technique.
I can share this project file. I can't.
You might
I'm
have
just
a
trying to
problem
think of.
if you've got library music in there, then
You know,
I think you'd have
it's
to work
library.
with music.
I can share it. It's just for education purposes. That's the only thing I have to mention. The
Okay.
audio can't be used for anything. Okay.
Okay, great.
Well, yeah, I can share this project file so you guys can see it. And I know, Simon, you had to share something, so let me hop out of my screen.
Well, just before you do that, Nick, could you just bring up that expression again?
Yeah, totally.
On there. This is a nice little kind of tease, because this sort of thing is what we're going to be talking about next week with adding UI elements or fake UI, FUI elements, and using expressions to animate those without keyframes, as well as layering up effects from, say, Universe to grunge things up to create lovely looking graphics and then make them look terrible. That classic technique. But this idea you've got of adding the expressions, I think, is a nice kind of segue, because that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about next week as well. So that's quite
Awesome.
handy.
And not to mention, but don't throw out Mir either, Simon. I wanted to mention, I think you have an example, but Mir has these awesome preset tunnels where you can basically take someone through a tunnel and then also have it react to audio as they travel, let's say, through a portal, and have it react to audio as well. This is really subtle, so it would do more justice if you could hear the audio, but check out some of the presets that come shipped with Mir. They're actually inside your Animate preset section of After Effects under Trapcode Mir 3. And what I recommend for this is find one with a tunnel. There's a tunnel here at the very bottom. You can apply that to a solid and see how that reacts.
Excellent.
I'm going to pass this back over to you. And yes, I am making you presenter.
Excellent. In fact, we'll be talking a little more about those tunnel things next week, because where have I got a decent tunnel I could quickly show you here? Oh, here we are. So this is what Nick is talking about. If you've got a tunnel inside Mir, this is Trapcode Mir, and we're using the bend. Where is it? Here we go. The bend parameter to create a tunnel. And there's some nice little tricks you can do to make these tunnels exactly mix. More of that next week, because I know we're just about to overrun out of time. But the example I wanted to show you from Mir was this one, where I'm also using sound keys, and I've got a pretty simple setup. Here's my setup. I'm actually looking at 90 degrees to a ribbon which I've made from Mir, and in the shader, rather than having the standard wireframe or fill that you can have inside here, just set it to points and increase the point size so you could see these, and then set the camera angle to 90 degrees, because I wanted to get a waveform that didn't look like the traditional waveform that you're used to looking at, just something slightly different. And in this case, if we look at the fractal settings inside here, fractal, then we've got the scroll on the x-axis is got an expression times 200, but also we've got the amplitude set up. Here we go, the expression amplitude Z and Y to react to the sound keys layer that we've got of a drum beat. And if I just turn on here we go, the keyframes for that. Every time we see two keyframes, I've got two ranges here, two ranges of sound keys set up, one for the bass drum and one for the snare, and they're just affecting that fractal ever so slightly. So then we're getting this nice exaggeration of that file to create a different type of waveform. So the concept is here, you don't have to go with something that has the audio act embedded like Trapcode form. You can then apply this to anything inside After Effects. I'm just happen to be doing it to Mir. And so just to finish up, I know we're 2 minutes over. I've just got another 2 minutes tops of something to show you. This is also an ad for next week. That if you are a fan of the Red Giant films, which I am, of course, then one of these things up here, I've got an example. Oh yes, here we go. A nice film to have a look at. This is under the Red Giant site. If you go to redgiant.com and click the films button, there's a great one by one of our designers, Leo, called Spin. And it's a nice little 2-minute film, which is kind of a take a little bit on Wizard of Oz, where we start off with a DJ, and she's DJing inside her house, but she hasn't noticed this large storm that's approaching. And the nice thing about this is that her DJing music kind of corresponds with the storm. So I won't give it all away, but right in the middle of it, we have a fake UI that she set up for, here we are, for doing exactly this. And that fake UI Leo created from scratch using universe and sound keys. And you'll recognize this quantize element because that's exactly what he used. Let's just jump over to After Effects for this example. So if we just jump into the UI elements itself, Leo in the behind the scenes, which you can also click on on the Red Giant website, he talks about taking this Illustrator design into After Effects and then animating some of these elements using sound keys. So there's a lot of universe graphics in here, but if we then just jump down and isolate this sound keys top left color map. So this will start to look quite familiar because this isolated element, which forms part of the UI, is actually driven by sound keys. And the sound keys effect in itself has got the color map, which is the orange and teal color map. So he's using that thing that we looked at about an hour ago now for taking the quantize and the fill segment and the visual aspect of what sound keys can generate, plus mapping those to other elements inside the scene. So he's got those mapped to the volume controls, these left and right bars as they're hovering left and right. So you can very quickly take something which is by itself a creation of fake UI, but then when you put it into the original film, let's just find this section, here we are. So we've got a number of things going on with this, but this is keyed onto an iPad inside the scene with the actor just pretending to adjust virtual elements timed with animation, some manual animation too. So I just wanted to kind of connect the dots, if you like. We've got the basic setup of what you can do inside sound keys, but actually here it is in a proper film as part of a storytelling device. So I just wanted to draw those lines and so how you can use these isolated elements that we've been pointing out, but actually do something to tell the story. Fantastic, great. Okay, let's just quickly jump back to the program of events. So next week, we'll be delving more into that. We'll be looking at designing and treating some of those fake UI and stylized elements in all sorts of circumstances, and in a similar format, taking the bare blocks of it and then applying it to something which is much more considered, and also showing them some quick ways of coming up with magic. Doing stuff that looks more expensive than the time taken to actually do it, which isn't the definition of graphics design, but it kind of helps along the way. Fantastic. Oh, there you are, Nick. Excellent. Thanks for sharing your camera. So one question from Ona, how could we build a project like that? We'll touch on that next week, and I'll show you some building blocks for it, and you can put it together as well. And I think you've got a few ideas for next week, Nick, haven't you?
Yes, I have a couple examples to show too, which I'll be able to share because it utilizes a lot of the universe HUD component graphics, which is going to be a really good tool to animate some elements quickly and then combine that with other HUD graphics and FUIs, like by using Cinema 4D and even Illustrator files like you mentioned.
Excellent stuff. Great. Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us this week. And feel free to reach out if you send an email to training@maxon.net or even training@redgiant.com. They both come to me, and we can, if you've got any follow-up questions, We plan to send you the links by email automatically, so you'll get those shortly. But if you don't see them, or if you haven't checked your email, we'll also add some of the download links to this, the list of on the list of the sessions, which is just under where it says May the 18th. So check that out as well. Fantastic. So thanks for spending this time with us. Thanks for the nice comments on the questions area. And we'll see you on the next one. Until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, and have fun with your animations. And
bye, everybody.
Also, thank you, Nick. Thanks for joining me for this time.
Thanks, Simon.
All right, take it easy, everyone. Cheers.
Have
Bye-bye.
a good one, everyone.